Thank you all so much for joining the Toadstool Bookshop, welcoming Meg Kearney and Sally Rosen Kindred for their poetry reading. Please support the poets by buying their books at thetoadbooks.com via the link that will be entering into the chat room. Just scroll past the event description and you'll see a nice little list that has a collection of all their works right there. All right, over to you, Rhett.
Okay. I'm going to introduce Meg and Sally right now. And then for the reading tonight, they're going to take turns reading poems. So I'm going to do both introductions up front. Meg Kearney is the author of 3 books of poetry, An Unkindness of Ravens, Home by Now, and her new collection, All Morning the Crows, winner of the 2020 Washington Prize for Poetry and published by the WordWorks Press. Her chapbook, The Ice Storm, published in 2020, is a heroic crown of sonnets. I'm going to pause there just to let that sink in because that's quite amazing. Okay, but wait, there's more. She's the author of 3 novels in verse for teens and an award-winning picture book, Trooper, illustrated by E.B. Lewis. Meg's poetry has been featured on Garrison Kaler's A Writer's Almanac and Ted Kuzer's American Life in Poetry, and included in the 2017 Best American Poetry Anthology, guest edited by Natasha Trethway. She lives in New Hampshire and directs the Solstice MFA in Creative Writing program in Massachusetts. Sally Rosen Kindred's 3rd book of poetry is Where the Wolf, winner of the 2020 Diode Book Award, out this week, like right now, pretty much, from Diode Editions. Her 2 previous collections are Book of Asters and No Eden. And her most recent chapbook is Says the Forest to the Girl from Pork Belly Press. She has received 2 awards from the Maryland State Arts Council, and her poems have appeared in the Gettysburg Review, Shenandoah, Cave Wall, and Kenyon Review Online, just to name a few. An online writing teacher for Johns Hopkins CTY, she'll be teaching this fall through the Poetry Barn, and you can find out more about that on her website. And to that official introduction, I just want to add one personal thing, which is that I have been looking forward to this reading my whole life, like from before when I even knew what a poem was. And that may sound like an exaggeration, but you know how when you read a book of poetry and you feel like that selfish reader feeling where you feel like it was written just for you? Well, that's how every single book these 2 poets have written makes me feel. Meg Kearney and Sally Rosen Kindred are 2 of my favorite poets of all time, not just because of their mastery of craft, their wide range of voice, and the surprising turns of imagery that act as multiple hinges in each poem, opening door after door, but also because their singing begins within but reaches always beyond, becoming a part of the great songs sung across time, across sorrow and joy, heart to heart, and to the world. Meg and Sally, thank you for what you are about to give us.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Rhett, who is also an amazing poet in her own right. Rhett and I met about 12 years, no, more than 12 years ago now. I think your book had just come out, Rhett. So whatever year that was, Rhett had come up here to New England and we read together in Massachusetts, in the Berkshires. And that began my friendship and sistership with Rhett Eisman Trull. And then it was Rhett who introduced me to Sally's work. It was, I think, at an AWP conference, and Rhett handed me one of Sally's earlier books, and immediately I felt this connection. I think that the 3 of us are kind of like long lost sisters or something. And Sally and I have actually never really, I don't think we've ever physically been in the same room, no. But we just feel this real kinship. And when I read her work, I really feel that sisterhood and connection so strongly. And when we started talking about reading together, we were seeing so many kind of echoes between the 2 books that we decided to do this reading as a kind of round robin. So we've had so much fun the last week emailing each other our set list. So I started us off and I said, okay, I'm gonna start us off with my poem called Cormorant, because I'm just going to be reading from my new book that just came out called All Morning the Crows. Came out June 1 officially. And each poem is a different name of a different bird. And so I said, all right, I'm going to start us out with Cormorant. And then she wrote back, okay, I'll follow with this. And we went back and forth in that way. And it took us a few days to put our set list together, because we were really thinking about, okay, what would I follow that poem with? So I hope it's as fun to listen to as it was just to put together. But we also figured it would be kind of a different slant on a poetry reading for all of us who have been going to virtual poetry readings, and kind of, you know, you get used to seeing like the talking head, right, in the little box. So this way you get a little variety back and forth with the two of us. So that being said, as I said, I'm going to start us off with the Cormorant poem. And I'll just mention that I'll use the word rack line, which I'm sure most of you know. The rack line on a beach is that zone or that area, that line along the beach where at high tide, all the seaweed and other debris is deposited at the rack line. Cormorant. Luminous as an oil slick in the sun, this morning's cormorant rides out low tide on a gray-green rock you couldn't see an hour ago. When the bird first surged from the sea, you thought snake. Something tunneling down its length like a vole. Not vole, crab. Then the shoulders, massive, mythic, snake on raven's back. Better, Milton Satan in a tree, tempting you. Its gleaming wings spread like great leaves to dry. There was a time you would have given in. You would have said yes, swallowed anything. Later, you would have woken cold, tangled amidst the seaweed and slime. That's where he found you, your beloved, one morning like this, walking the rack line. Thanks, Sally.
So beautiful. Massive and mythic, which I think is how your poems first struck me, Meg, when I first heard them. The first poem of yours I ever heard was Creed, and it was read aloud to a class I was taking by the teacher Cornelius Eady. And I drove home the 40 minutes and I ordered it immediately, Unkindness of Ravens, which if you don't have the book, you should get it. So I've been a fan of Meg's long before she heard my name, I'm sure. And I thank you, Rhett, for bringing us together. And thanks to Elise and Willard at the Toadstool. Rhett, thank you for that gracious and moving introduction. I thought I was going to cry, and I was like, how am I going to do the rest of this? Anyway, the poem I'm going to read in response, almost every poem Meg sent me, I thought, I can't follow that up. So it was a little while before she got her emails back. But the poem I will read is from Where the Wolf, which is out today. Release date was the 15th, but they sent them early, so they're on people's doorsteps today. This poem is called Is She? You think this is a poem where the wolf. The forest, after all, is a sleeve of glass daggers. You, the girl, cold throat, wet shoes. Wolf is the ghost of a hurt, remembering itself. Is she? You can hear her between trees. You can see the ghost her mouth was, weaving wet fur in the shards. If the forest is an altar built in the crack of your lost one's femur, then this is the moment when the girl is you kneeling before it. Wolf says the scarlet bird is the one with a scar in it. Wolf says, gather stones. Will be the end of the story of the wolf moving slowly across the sentence you have been speaking since before you were born. You say what a stone says in the pocket of your dress and forget you were ever a wing.
So awesome. Thank you for that, Sally. It's funny, like where the mind goes in different poems and why, you know, we make the choices that we do. And when we come up with a line or even a word or an image, you know, and then why, you know, why I chose this next poem to read following that. This is a poem I've actually been avoiding reading because it's difficult. So I'll just say that, you know, little trigger warning. While there's not like explicit action wise of sexual assault, it's definitely here. So people should be aware of that. This is bittern, Bittern, bittern. And bitterns, they are like a water bird, one that you would find in estuaries and swamps along like wide rivers like the Hudson River. And they can camouflage themselves. They'll just freeze their body and they have kind of a striped plumage, and they can act as if they're one of the reeds or the grasses. So, you know, to hide from their enemies. Bittern. I thought nothing of walking alone on the trail along the river until the photographs in the paper, whispers at the hardware store and post office. The men had dragged them both, but tied only the mother, stuffed her own socks in her mouth. It must have taken hours, what they did then, until they were through. A hiker found the body first, blood where they cut off her clothes and got sloppy. A few yards away, the girl sat among the cattails and tall grasses. The birds were silent, but not the crickets. She tilted her head, all crimson patches, stared directly at the sun. In her lap, that nest of auburn hair. Her slender body swayed slightly in the autumn breeze, like all the other reeds.
Wow. Such a powerful poem and very hard to know what to read next. This poem does something that happens throughout this book, which is pulls from elements of fairy tales and retells elements of fairy tales to create, well, to do what? I don't know, to re-enter stories and experience. And I chose this one because I feel like it offers a little bit of mercy. It's in two short parts. It's called I Tell What Kind of Girl. 1. There was a girl once, sewn into an elm. She thought a fox set her there, Softened against the stitches, she tamed their cries by hand. But this girl wed her bones to desire. Her longing sang, soured through heartwood, and then her hurt burned her through, broke from buds and flooded the fields in all her white wings. It must have been good. 2. There was another girl, trapped in a tooth. She rose and fell in the wind's cool mouth. She was afraid to invent a body she could leave. So she stayed there, and the wind held her. In mutual dread, they sang, they circled the meadow. She believed she needed a fox's heat to find her skin, to open a white door and let her down into the grass. But none could come inside, where the walls were December smooth and cold. It wasn't like ice. It wasn't like anything you know. Through the white door, she could hear the pinched hearts of asphodel. And then it opened, like mercy, like a breath, when she began to tell.
I love that a flower could have a pinched heart. Thanks. Wow. Okay. So you might have caught on by now, or you know that these bird poems aren't really about birds. The bird is really just kind of the launching point. I started with this book called 100 Birds and How They Got Their Names by Diana Wells, and kind of just gave myself this assignment to write a poem for every one of the 100 birds. And then this, you know, as poems will do, they just started running away with themselves. And eventually this book emerged. So this is Swifts. Swifts. Mornings back in her attic apartment days, that ghost gray house shipwrecked between the railroad tracks and the river. Swifts streamed by her skylight like a ribbon, twisted, then lifted up and east toward town. By dusk, they were funneling above the chimneys, 6 crumbling roosts the second floor boys planned to raid should they discover a recipe for swift soup. The boys, students at the Culinary Institute, drawn to menus of the unusual and bizarre. Flying cigars, they nicknamed those birds. Blunt heads and squared off tails, color of dried tobacco. When she lit a spliff, cranked ZZ Top, the boys pounded on her trap door to come up. What did she know about lust? Not enough. The whole house shook with it each time a train rumbled by. She'd pile her books on the door, along with the ladder, its coil of rope. 2 friends had said, buy a gun, but she could never. Swifts circled her skylight twice before setting down. A sign, she'd hope, the door would foil those soon-to-be chefs, baying by then like hounds.
The next poem I'm going to read is one of a sequence of poems that kind of weave through the book that are self-portrait poems, and they involve late adolescence and early 20s. And I actually had an attic apartment poem, but I picked a different one to go with this. But doing this with Meg, I learned so much of what we had in common, down to shared attic apartment living in our 20s. This next poem is it's called Self-Portrait at 19 as Bottle of Yellow Pills. Now I'm filled tall with stars. I hold still to the nightstand, to the glass lip of night. I wait to be taken like the girl lying under a boy in the blue button-down shirt. I can't remember when I stopped being flesh and became this brown shine by her sleeping side, but it's better this way. The sun palms me the same hour each day, and I am lidded, clapped tight. No meadow of bees, warp-songed, drifting. I love to be raised warm in her hand, to be turned once and spilled, me from me, and then the sound of my new body shaken, the ring and swing of what's set right, and how I know by feel or hum some lit piece of me, candled between girls and sky's eye, goes on ahead. All will be changed in there, and fierce, lonely, at the sill of the sorrow cathedral, I'll learn to ride the dark on in, beyond the teeth.
At the sill of the sorrow cathedral. Oh, and the glass lip of night. Thanks, Sally. Okay. And I will follow that with Plovers. And Plovers is set at Old Orchard Beach, Maine, 1985. Plovers. Like these plovers, I'm just passing through. Plovers newly arrived from Florida, along with the rest of the snowbirds. 75 El Camino, huffing like an old dog, is what got us here. The guys chugged beer the entire drive. Okay, so did I. Check out these plovers slinging back sand flies. Another one of those trips we were lucky to survive. Guidebook says in medieval times, a plover could tell whether a man would live or die. Maybe some plover looked me in the eye as I poured myself onto this beach, more drunk than alive. Deem me too dumb to die yet. Up beach bodybuilders oil their biceps while the guys fetch margaritas from the tiki bar. One's my lover, the other along for the ride. Mark, like the apostle. I'm not really dumb, just 5 on a scale of 1 to... Guide says plover's name comes from the Latin word for rain, but doesn't explain why. Each time I say bride, Mark's face looks like rain. But who am I? Too good for what? Now the guys still at the bar wave frosted glasses, faces frosted too. No doubt they've sniffed a line. No booze, they mime, allowed on the beach. Coked up love, a loaded vow. Might not get better than that, I tell Mark. Tonight, this crowd will recede like the tide. Not the guys, Too high, I'm sure, to find our motel. I'll dig a seat here in the sand, watch the moon rise. Plovers will sleep in the shallows where they hide. Thanks.
Gosh, the voice in that and the music, so great. So many of your poems in this book I had to read aloud because I just love the sounds of them. So hard to find one to follow up, but this poem involves bird guides and the ocean. And takes us in a slightly different direction. A lot of the poems in this book are either about having a mother or being a mother. This one is called Which Way is November and How Many Feathers? Birds and families of birds say books on the table I won't open. There is a groaning in my right ear when I lie down, which is a friction of liquid or crystals or maybe bits of nest. My mother was like the bird in the storybook who wore the kerchief around her head. She walked off in the wrong direction to find me. I stayed on the ground. I covered myself in her gleam, dark rain, pins of cold pine. There is a groaning in the ocean. There are mollusks turning in sand. Inside my mother's body, cracked windows are swimming. To think about kingfishers instead is to forgive the mind. Nidicolous reared for a time in the nest. To hatch featherless, closing their eyes to the forest. There is a groaning in my right ear when I lie down, which I hope is the ink of ghosts. In my shoulder, a crown of panic birds prayed from sugars. They want to tell me what we've forgotten. They sing to the stained drums and out the windows of their skulls. Each hatchling born helpless, say the heavy books. My mother's hands won't say where the stamp goes on a letter, not even if the stamp bears a lark, its once bold barbs now made of whispers. The groaning in my right ear can't be the Atlantic. I am tired of phylum and superorder, a tree webbed with the blot of the species, the season's black lace. My mother would like to see the beach again, but not in November. And she's not sure of my name.
Thank you, Sally. Your poems just break my heart. I hope people can see like why we feel like this thread that keeps going back and forth between these books. I'm going to read Starlings now, which came to my mind after hearing Which Way is November. I'll say in winter, starlings have a speckled or a starry plumage, and a flock of starlings is also called a murmuration. Starlings. All the starlings I have known are dead. Summers I'd scrape them off the schoolhouse lawn, their nests on the ledge of a slate blue roof. Babies. Sorry, I'm going to start over again. All the starlings I have known are dead. Summers I'd scrape them off the schoolhouse lawn, their nests on the edge of a slate blue roof. Babies featherless, heads too heavy, breathing shallow as the promises of drunks. I've known a few of them too, heads dipping and rising before the final plunk. There's only so much you can do, which by 7 or 8 I knew about drunks. But baby birds I thought might be saved with an eyedropper filled with milk, some mushed up worms. What I wanted to shove down their throats was song, echo of their parents' cartoon chirps, their imitation coughs of crows that peppered the schoolhouse willow. Damn, starlings will mimic anything. Drunkards bellow, 18th century allegretto. Mozart once bought a pet starling when it whistled his G major concerto. He was flattered, I am sure, though maybe too, like me, he thought a song could save a thing, could save a starling anyhow. I buried those babies on the school's vast grounds, marked the place with stones. Winters I would visit there while my mother drank alone. Quiet, I'd tell the babies' ghosts as their murmuration rose far above the schoolhouse roof, its belly full of stars. Thank you.
I love that poem. Now I'm going to cry. I'm not going to cry because I have more poems to read, but that is a poem I've returned to again and again in your book. I just love it. And those ghost starlings, gracious. And those stars, I'm going to read the first poem in the book. And it's called First Night. And I want to thank Rhett because she published it in Cave Wall, which is the best home I can imagine for this poem. First Night. 2 hours after my father left for good, with his wet hair lamp gleam black and his zippered bag, my mother pulsed through the house, turning off all the lights. I followed her, then sat on the rug in the dark, watching smoke twist up from her cigarette and drop small stars to burn into her blouse, black with blue roses. I did not yet believe in the kitchen to come, in bottles that lit and littered the air, tilting here from the future, that God could lay her down years on that couch. I looked up at her. I touched the rug's braid. Behind her head, 4 cold windows. Beyond them, outside, in grass, moon wet with night, a ghost wolf guarded the yard. In memory, she moves out now from the alders and skirts the silver swings. Her tufts bristle in the grass. We had called her name with a snap of the switch on the glass white globe, turn of the lamp's brass key, with our breath and fingers. Without that dark, wolf could never have found us. She could not have come to me, would not have felt safe. My mother was sagging already, losing stars, buckling under her story. Pain found me wolf's ghost body, gave me never, and fur I dreamed, I hid, I held, I would not tell.
it just struck me. I love that poem so much. And the poem, that's the first in your book. And then I follow it with Owl, which is the first in my book. So that's very strange. I don't know why, but it is. But Owl just followed naturally that poem. So Owl. She birthed you, but she is so unknowable. Is that the word? Try nocturnal. Each night she glides on wings silent as a vole quivering under snow. Perched on your bedroom sill, she watches you dream twitch, then spins her head to spy the snow mound ripple, sugary in moonlight, as the vole tunnels past pines. She lifts off, silent, still, and you, daughter of hurt and squeal, are awake. When you sigh, your heart-shaped face aches. Is that the word? Try breaks. Knowing when she dies, you'll inherit all she's swallowed whole, yet had to leave behind.
Man, daughter of hurt and squeal, gracious. Amazing, amazing poem. And yeah, I did notice they were both the first ones, and we sort of hit them in the middle, which is, it's interesting. The next poem is called Coda, the Night Glass. When I was 10, she set a glass of wine on the table. My mother knew to praise, and the paints for night, currant, rookwood, garnet, stirred in the drift, shade of a hood, her thirst unsleeved in parts, a stem first, a mouth. My mother's lips, though, were a blue envelope, a glued wing, a flap could keep her sleep's secrets. Late at night, the glass would crack. Its whistle split shingles, let the sky inside. She made it. Her fear named the parts. Night sky, a stem. Night sky, a mouth. She could drown a hyacinth. She could thread a wolf through the moon. When I was 10, a glass of wine. Now I howl when it spills over. I stain when it slips through. She'll say, crimson, no, invention. Call the red dress my dream. I wake hard, a daughter. I break back into my skin.
If you've sensed a mother theme going on here, just a little bit, there are threads, other threads, different threads in the books, but we caught on to the mother thread, and then yeah. So this is Juncos. Juncos. I can't pour this bird seed from cup to feeder without seeing my mother pour a scotch. I can't. After they cut out her lung, I said, I'll call you every day. She said, did you call, then hang up? Don't bother, my brother said. She never remembers. Now I'm standing on the back deck of the house in New Hampshire, a cup of birdseed in my hands. Now I'm standing on the roof of my old building on East 20th Street, watching the towers fall. Now I'm sneaking into my childhood home in LaGrange, thinking of Juncos, their gray white bodies like a building smoldering. Birdseed turns golden, poured into morning air. Birdseed is not whiskey, but birdseed, it's in your hair, my mother said, reaching for me.
I want to agree that these books are about more than mothers, and then read another mother poem. But where would poets be without their mothers? This one is called When You Call My Body an Odd Thing. Once I was the sonnet inside you, fetal, compressed. Remember our thirst and what you wanted, garnet words turning in their beds. This was back when you held weather before you felt it break, back before the fathers and their pills, the winds that shrilled and shrank us. Sorry, you almost wrote, rhyming worry into my heart's code. Once I was the umbrella. Inside you, the dead sent rain. I know now I was something held, your little shadow, little shade. I opened to catch a bright stigma of stars that fell across dark fields. Then our hurts became finger-painted roses, sealed, full-blown and folded flat, unpeeling into wet, mirrored blooms. Now you can't hold me anymore. You see the sky, strange and heavy. You hand me your lipstick, your purse, hard things that shine night black and away. You look into them and see your body, your body. Mother, if you don't know me now, don't you know the stone I was inside you? Can't you make room for the ring beneath your tongue? Just open your hand a minute, hold it. You don't have to call it blue or beautiful. You don't have to keep it warm.
Yeah, oh, love that poem, Sally. Duckling Swan. Before I was born, I was biggest of the clutch, already a burden and slow to hatch. When at last I smashed my way into this world, my mother's tongue unfurled a hiss, siblings snickered and jeered. Who could love an ugly girl, smothered in egg wax, gray as the curl in a drowned man's lip? Even cleaned up, my down was ash. I was the art of my mother's mistake, the ache in her dinosaur heart. I was the winter, the ice over early, no fish in the pond, and the hunter's sure shot. I had nowhere to go when they drove me out. I went like something dead in Coyote's mouth, like something a cat mauled, then tossed about. I starved through the full moons, slept in the snow. But by spring, a lake was aglow with my gleaming. In spring, I returned and blinded them all.
I want to ask you to read it again, but I guess we need to go forward, not back. Oh, that ache in her dinosaur heart. It's terrific. We're getting towards the end here. This one is a little bit longer than the previous, but not a lot. It's called Letter to My 1970s. Dear Nixon, dear apron, dear child's candied tongue, there's been a wrinkle. You left the sprinkler on, the curling iron plugged in. On the table, no note, you'd remember it. Dear ones, my groovy dead, it never said, forgive me. The typewriter's still humming. It looks like rain. Sadie, the neighbor's hound, is whining in the street. It never said, remember, a tooth beneath your pillow means the president will resign, so your parents' marriage can run an extra year, stirred up by Watergate and wine. Don't forget, Sadie tipping her brindle head. They hardly fed her. Do you hear thunder? Dear umbrella heart, it's still July. We can't spend all day in the backyard, flushed in long dresses, pretending to wave from the tarmac. Let's hit the bookcase, head inside. Secret of the bitter clock, secret of the thirsty well. Dig deeper in the couch, the plot's all wrong. Dear Encyclopedia Britannica, dear family of 5, the house is shrinking by the eaves, by the dogwood saucer leaves. No room for rhodesia and index cards that blot the rug. No more dreams down the shelf of heavy books and the man who stood before them emptying his pennies and his keys. No secrets, velvet. No secrets, steel wool. Mom's last Valium fell in the tub. Or under the bed, her kettle's cold, her thimbles on the porch. Dear right eye, you invented this pain. Dear left eye, stand down. Dear Nixon, dear apron, it's getting dark. You can't stay here. Best to take it at a run. Sadie will come too. Act natural, like you do it every day. Grab her leash and head for the winter trees. Bring your mittens, dear lonely. Don't sign your name.
It's kind of uncanny, it's not so surprising that poets would have birds. Like we all have birds in our poems, right? Like show me a book of poems that doesn't have at least one bird in it, but that we have like the 1970s, we have Briar Rose. We have not just dogs, but hounds. And there was one other that had come to my mind a minute ago, but it's very uncanny and great. So I am going to read just 2 more poems. This one is Loon. I bought a cassette tape of loon calls so I could speak their language that summer I camped on Russet Pond. This was the 80s, so cassette tapes were the thing. Side A was for "Where are you? I am here," or "I am hungry" calls, meaning hoots, wails, and peeps. Side B was for aggression and distress, yodels and tremolos. The latter, a kind of alarm laugh that led to the saying, crazy as a loon. Kids today don't have the chance to choose between side A and B. B, the poor man's intermission, or a sleeper's song, Second Chance. But now I'm talking 45 records, 1972, with deeper and deeper on the B-side of Billy Don't Be a Hero, which was more a tremolo than a yodel, a sentimental, romantic, anti-war song that slew my heart in 3rd grade. No one I knew liked Deeper and Deeper, though on Russet Pond I learned that loons with their solid bones can dive deeper and longer than most birds. And I found I preferred whales to tremolos, whales being the kind of call I'd perfected myself by then.
Oh, I love the end of that one. I also have just 2 to go. And as I had said, a lot of these poems are about having a mother, but also being a mother. Haven't hit a lot of those this reading, but here's one. And this one is for my son, Noah, and also for my husband, his father, Daryl. It's called And Ryegrass and Wind. When we drove by the field where the horse always stood, the chestnut named Loretta, you'd move your small hand to the glass, say, horse. You'd circle your hand in the air to ghost the mall carousel. I'd say, but those horses aren't real. You'd say, nay. And one day, the field had no horse in it. One day the air was a hole all the nut brown reel had fallen through. That day you splayed your hand on the glass and said, horse, the way you'd say milk, and there was only thistle and a lip of light. The next day there was a paper on the fence, some child's crayon paper of a horse. And you made me drive to the fence and climb out and touch the muddy sheet. Or we'd drive and park in front of the raw, unstained grass, our windows up, and watch the brown crayon lick the wet pulp dripping from last night's rain. You'd bring your cup of red juice or a book in the car. And you are 2 arms lifting and spinning. You are nosing the glass, and I am your mother. I am the one who is supposed to save you, my flank, my gamble, my mane, who can never save you, my flesh, my field, my whinny, my clover hair.
Amazing. Before I read my last poem, I just want to thank all of you for being here tonight. Thank you so much to this incredible audience, and to the Toadstool for hosting us, and to Rhett for introducing us. And Sally, this has just been such a blast, so thank you. I'm going to end with Barn Swallows, which, when I was sending the poem individually out to magazines, it was called Barn Swallows Truck Mud, which I think gives it more clarity. It kind of places you better. So I'm going to just start calling it Barn Swallows Truck Mud, even though it just says Barn Swallows in the book. Bird shit will strip paint off a truck as sure as your ex cleaned you out of near everything you owned. So as swallows circle and swoop round rafters overhead, their colony of nests sweating mud in the half dark, you spread a tarp over the cab. Coked up birds, you think, then cops covered his body, his face, like this. More birds sweep out the barn door and soon are back, feasting on flies that still haunt the empty horse stalls. Before you cover the cap, you peer through its glass. They're there, rolled up mat, sleeping bag that formed your bed after how many midnight escapes? Don't count. Once he stole those too, along with your shoes. But after a 70-hour high, he passed out and you stole them back, then disappeared for days. That was an art you shared, but he finally perfected. When they buried him, it rained so hard the ground seemed to suck him under. It was mud tried to steal your shoes then, while the preacher told of Christ as a boy molding mud into swallows that up and flew away. Thank you again.
Wow, Meg, I'd really like to stop now. That was so beautiful. I want to thank you again so much for inviting me to be part of this with you. It's been amazing. And Rhett, I want to thank you for doing this with us and for bringing us together in the first place. And thanks to Elise and Willard at the Toadstool and all of you for coming. My last poem is called Late Dream with Winter Coat. Out of my coat came a womb, my mattress, my charcoal moon. Mercy is the myth sewn back into the belly with rocks after the dead are lifted out. From this wolf dark wool, smoke pockets, cloud collar, this prize I'd pulled from my mother's own house, hardwood knots unraveled, blurred into the yard, mud in the cradle, mud in the code, and tile claws, glyphic, marked the lining at my hips. Tell you someone stole my mattress, dragged it, slapping wet steps, down to a strange cellar floor, unfinished, painted it gray, turned it like a page. Spread across its sheets and craters, a family of rocks, piled plastic hair and lips, all my heart's dead dolls. Now, back in my body, no place to lie down. And the cold comes, it's winter, remember, shakes the walls with her clock's hollow bell. Mercy is the motor spinning this story, dream wheel of wolf pelt and curls. On the coat made of mother's words and cigarette ghosts, the buttons groan. Still, I wear it, hold its season against me. Skin of a clock face, shoulder and seam, even empty. It keeps me warm. Thank you.
Hooray.
That was beautiful, guys. Oh my gosh. I just want to experience both of your books now with you reading poems back and forth from it. I mean, that worked so well together. Golly. If anyone has any questions, you can just unmute and ask. And if you'd rather type them into the chat, I'll try to catch them there.
And even though we thought we had this so well timed out, it was supposed to end at 9 and here we are 10 minutes late. So if people have to go too, we totally get that. Yeah.
Also, I want to remind everybody that these books are for sale and you can read more even than the bounty you have heard here. And I don't know if Elise, you can put oh, there it is. Yeah, in the chat, the link to order them is back up. So just remind everybody of that. Did anybody have a question? I'll ask a question. So Meg, what came first? What comes first for you with these poems? Was it you thought of a bird, you researched a bird, and then the poem came to you, or was it like the genesis of the poem was in and of itself, and then it fit with a certain bird? Like, how did that work?
I love a good prompt, you know, so I just really, in the beginning, I gave myself a prompt, 100 birds and how they got their names. And each description of a bird is just usually like 1 or 2 pages with the little pencil sketch of the bird. So I said, all right, I'm just going to read the description, and then whatever happens, happens. So I'd write the name of the bird at the top, I'd read the description, and then just like go, you know. And so I took a year and I wrote 100 of these poems to go with the 100 birds and how they got their names. And then I had to set that manuscript aside for actually almost 2 years before I went back to it. And then, you know, then it just started kind of taking on its own life. And I threw out half of them, you know, and rewrote the rest. But yeah, it just, then I started seeing how the threads and how they were starting to talk with each other. And that helped me revise. And then I also brought in other sources after 100 Birds and How They Got Their Names. But Diana Wells is the name. It's really a great book for anybody interested in birds. You'll find out things you never would learn in any guide. I don't want to hold people too late, so.
Yeah, I'll ask one last question. Since I just asked you a question, let me ask Sally a question. And then I guess we'll let everybody
Be brief, because I know people have been super patient with us, and I appreciate
briefly answer this thing.
Okay.
So much sound in your poems, so much music, just of the, and it, you know, a lot of times we write poems image to image, and you do that, but there's also a whole lot of sound to sound kind of echoing throughout your poem, like where some sounds obviously just lead to the next line by sound, and then the images weave in. So could you talk briefly a few sentences about sound and how that works for you in your poems?
I mean, I think you nailed it. I do work associatively with sound a lot. And I find I'm more likely to surprise myself in terms of the leaps between images if I follow to the next sound first rather than to the next image first. I think I'm a little obsessive and a little closed, so I'm more likely to kind of spin out on the same images, which, you know, there are a lot of wolves in these poems, but a way that forces me to make leaps is to listen for the next sound. And I also use a lot of accidents. You know, if I write down one word, but I'm thinking another, or I think of something that it sounds like and it doesn't make sense, I'll go ahead and put it down and then try and find my way there. So I definitely work associatively with sounds. So yeah, you got it.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you everybody so much for coming.
All so much.
Thanks for this amazing reading, you guys. It was beautiful.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Appreciate all of you being here so much.
Yes.
And thanks again to the Toadstool and to Red.
You guys are welcome. That was a really wonderful presentation.
Thanks, Elise.
Thank you.
And Elise is going to save us the chat, so we'll be able to read what everybody wrote.
Hey. Yeah,
Okay.
sorry, I didn't see anything in the chat, but look forward to seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks
Thanks again, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.